Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art2Life podcast. We are talking today to my really good friend, Noah Woods. He's an artist, amazing art instructor, writer, all around amazing human. Last week, we started this interview and barely got going, so we made it a two-parter. So if you want to hop back to the last week's episode and listen to that first, maybe you could do that. You can also go to art2life.com, click on podcasts, and you can see from last week and this week links to Noah's artwork and some of the books he's mentioned and some of the other links that he'll be talking about today. We're still talking about transformation. We're still talking about curiosity and following our intuition and our hunches and just the adventure of this art making journey. And this is something Noah and I have shared for the last 40 years together, and it's just a real privilege to to have this conversation. So Noah, thanks for coming back and finishing, at least getting some more of this amazing content. I know of the things that you know, and I couldn't resist
Nick, it's a treat.
going longer. So thank you
It's an
for
absolute
this.
treat. So thank you for this.
We just to catch you guys up, and maybe Noah, you could say it better, but we were just talking about going for, in your case, sort of from a perfectionism, the kind of perfection in your art making and a kind of anility, to maybe choose a poor word, but it was so controlled, your earlier work, and you went through a series of teachers and different experiences that we talked about last week, and catches up
Well,
to where you
I
left
had
off and
mentioned
what's
last
going to
time we
happen
talked
next.
how I had crashed into this creative wall. I mentioned that people were suddenly working now on the computer, and all the art directors were calling and they were asking what program. And
Mm.
I was like, I'm not working in a program, it's all by hand. And then I mentioned I went away with 9 Tibetan monks who were giving me life lessons. Most importantly, they discussed authenticity versus inauthenticity and flow versus stagnation, which I think some of your listeners would definitely be able to identify with. Then we talked about our favorite art teacher, Dwight Harmon, and just how he got us to not be afraid of paint, or certainly tried to get us to not be afraid of paint. And he had some rather unorthodox ways to do that. And then I shared 4 books that fell into my lap during that time, that just sort of changed my whole life.
Yeah, and those links are just we'll link those to the show.
So
Those will all be in the
what
show notes.
happened
So
next during that time
perfect.
was something, again, so arbitrary. I was invited to this brunch, and I was seated next to the front man of the B-52s, the rock band, the B-52s, Fred Schneider. And this is about 30 years ago. And so uh, we immediately just start talking about art and music and all this good stuff. And Fred, that very first day, he said, "Hey, I'm going to a show right now after this party on collage. Do you want to come with?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so we go to this. I didn't even know this. It was like just down the street from where I live, and walk into the gallery, and there's like 50 really well-known names in the fine art world, some living, some not. And it's just covered wall to, floor to ceiling with all these variations of collage. And there's people in there that you would expect, like Robert Rauschenberg, and just everybody in the biggest names in the art world. Everybody is in this show. And then off to the side, when you walk in, or I think we're like 5, maybe 4 collages about that big, and they were mesmerizing. And I I couldn't believe what I was looking at. It was pure magic. And it was the work of the German artist Kurt Schwitters. And if you look up Schwitter's work, a lot of it is very loud. These what it is exactly, it's torn paper, it's
Yeah.
found paper. It's literally paper he found in the street. And this is like in the 30s and the 1940s. And he would just take pieces of paper and just put them right next to each other and form a canvas of this of old pieces of paper, which speaks back to the book that we talked about earlier of Wabi Sabi and Beautiful Imperfection. And here it was in bright Broadway lights. Well, but not so bright, but it was like that. And these were particularly quiet and subdued. And I was absolutely mesmerized. And it's all I needed to see. And it's funny because in January I saw Fred in New York and we grabbed coffee, and I said, I don't know if you know this or not, but 30 years ago we went to this gallery, and I don't know if you know what an impact that had on my
Wow.
life. And I reminded him of the show, and he was like, "Oh yeah," and he was like, "That show was amazing." I digested that, and then like just a short time later, I was in New York, and there was another Kurt Schwitter's piece up on a wall, and it was about the same size, and it blew my mind, and it was quite life changing in its imperfection and in its beauty and in its quietness. Again, there are a lot of Kurt Schwitters that aren't so quiet, but all of these were kind of melodically beautiful.
It's so interesting, Noah, as I've listening to these sort of pivotal moments, they all came through someone walking up to you saying, "Hey, can I go show you something? Here, come here," and you saying yes to it. But it wasn't like you just kind of were nosing through some books in a
Right.
library and found, it was people, it was
It was.
relational in your case, and
It
mine
was.
too,
That's,
I think,
I
but
mean, I've
it's
had
just
so many
especially
moments like that in my life.
for
One of
you.
the Keith Haring book that I talked to you about, the Keith Haring journals, that one, for instance, like that, I was in a bookstore on Melrose back in the 80s, and that book literally fell off a bookshelf and it landed on my feet. And and, and that book had such an enormous impact on my life. It literally
Wow.
fell off the shelf, and I start peeking through it, and I'm like, I need to buy this book. And then here I am, all these years later, telling my students, buy this book. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so powerful. The hand, someone just handing something to you, or I mean that this is the value of
mhm,
relationship, that somebody can show you a thing and
right.
completely
Well,
blow
Nick,
your
the last
whole
thing that
perspective up.
happened during that time was I just got to a point where I wanted just to take all that old work of mine and drop it off at a crematorium and just burn it all up. I think the artist John Baldessari actually did that, but which I later learned. But at that time, I just wanted to create a bonfire and have an inferno and just light it all up. I just needed it out of my life. And I was in the desert at that time, really trying to process what am I going to do with all this work? I just don't want it. And then I got this phone call from this gallery owner who I had known for years, and and he said that he had been trying to reach me for a while, and explained I'm in the middle of the desert, not very good reception, and I'm going through something about wanting to burn all my work. And he says, "Well, don't burn your work. I was actually calling to see if you wanted to have a show of all your old work." I mean, it literally unfolded
My God.
like that. A short time later, and it was I have to say, this is a small little gallery, and we crammed it with all my stuff. And I just wanted to, like, as I've been trying to express, I wanted to get rid of it. practically encouraging the gallery owner to sell it for $1.50. Just get them out of my life. Perfect.
Well, just it's just they bugged you because they were
Yeah.
a reminder of your perfect. They're
Yes.
perfect,
Perfectly. I like
perfectly
that.
annoying.
So we had a little show, and an opening is so fun, and all your friends come and everything, and that was worth the price of admission. Personally, I'm like, just to see everybody. Well, the opening night, in walked the British actor Sir Ian McKellen, and to this day I have no idea why he came to my show. It literally was such a tiny little show, and he comes in and he buys one of my paintings, one of my illustrations, and for $1.50, and then I decide to give him another painting, and it's about Shakespeare, and I. You, I don't know about you, Nick, but there's things that I know that I have no reason to know. And this was an instant like that. I knew that he began his career in Shakespeare and all that, and so I had this very funny piece, or semi-funny piece, of this woman in a muumuu, and she's got curlers in her hair, and she's yelling at her dog, who's gone to the bathroom on the floor, and she's calling the dog Spot, but she's yelling at the dog, "Out, out, damn Spot," which of course is Lady Macbeth from Macbeth. So I but it's here it is in a modern woman in a big house muumuu, and she's yelling at her dog, and so I give him that one, and then he says, and pardon my horrible British accent that I'm about to do, he said, "You must come to dinner," and he said, "I'm having a dinner party tomorrow night. You must come," and I'm like, okay. And it was sort of an invitation I couldn't refuse. And so the night after the show, um, I go to Sir Ian McKellen's house that he was renting at the time in the Hollywood Hills, and it was a small little dinner party. But in the corner was my art god, David Hockney, and I have I have found myself through a couple mutual friends. I have found myself on the peripherals of saying hi to him once or twice before, like never had a conversation with him. Suddenly, I was able to have a quick conversation with him. He was in the corner telling jokes while he's rolling cigarettes, and just being David Hockney, and being totally clearly captivating and very charismatic. And and then
Wow.
at the end of the evening, I don't know where I got the nerve, but I went up to him and I said, would you like to possibly have lunch sometime?" And he immediately said, "Why, yes, yes, of course."
Wow. Because I knew you back then,
Still
and
is.
you were he was your idol. I mean, you talked about him nonstop. I know, but before you met him, I mean, you must have just been just
No,
beside yourself, and you
I didn't know
didn't know when
I
you
didn't
went into the dinner
no,
party
there
that
was
it was going to be with David
it was
Hockney.
like
Was really
it was like Ian and Hockney, and a couple of the band members from Duran Duran, and the writer Armistead Maupin, who wrote
oh my
Tales of the
god.
City. It was anyway. So, but the impact of Hockney I can't emphasize enough for me personally, because I think this book right here, David Hockney by David Hockney, which came out I think in like 19, I want to say 1970. Oh, it is 1976. I read this as a teenager, and it just kind of blew my mind. And there were things in here that I I understood. Also, the art was a celebration of life on so many levels, and also the color was so free, and he was so I don't know, he was just so fully amazing in that book, and I gobbled it up as a teenager, and then when I was as I told you in the last podcast, when I was a busboy, and like, and like there is the president of the United States at one table, there was Mae West at another table, and Frank Sinatra at another table. Forget them. At my table, I was waiting on, there was my favorite artist, David Hockney, and I was bothering the heck out of him. I would bring him every condiment that we had in the restaurant. Like I think I brought them like gravy while they were in the middle of dessert. I was being I was being a pest. And then I just remember the waiter comes into the kitchen, and Hockney used to draw on the fabric on the fabric napkins, and he would give that to the waiter.
Oh,
And one day, and I should mention that up on the walls of the restaurant there was a very large bacon. There was a small Hockney, and there was a Charles Arnoldi. And you guys, if you're not familiar with bacon or Arnoldi, look them up. Chuck Arnoldi, one of the major California artists still, I think. Anyway, so this waiter walks into the back kitchen, and he says, that artist dude on table 6 just drew me a drawing on the napkin. And I just blew up. And I said, that artist dude is a god. I said it so apoplectically. I was just like, you have no idea who that is. Oh my God. Anyway.
you should have offered him $5 for the. Here's let me just take this. It's kind of
So
fun.
cut to, I'm at Ian McKellen's house, and I basically beg in the nicest way, I hope, Hockney to have lunch with me. And for some reason, he says yes. I leave the party so high on cloud nine, like thinking immediately, I've got to make Hockney a gift. I've got to make him a gift just that says, you are a god.
I mean, the
Well,
stress
wait, look.
he
So
must have
like
been
there,
under.
and my illustration schedule was I just remember I was like booked. I had illustrations due for like 7 or 8 different clients. I have never done this then or
Oh,
before or since, but I put all of that aside because I needed to make a painting for David Hockney. So I decide as soon as I wake up in the morning, I'm
wow.
going to start this painting. Our lunch is in 2 days. I think I can do this. I'm going to keep it simple. Thanks, Dad, who said keep it simple. And I'm just about 2 hours into it, and and I should tell you what it was. It it felt like it was 20 feet tall, but what it was a painting of a woman's face. I painted it on a sheet of foam core, which is kind of like a thick cardboard, but it's very pliable. I paint this face. The woman's hair is white. Her face is black. Her lips are white. Her nose is white. And then she has no pupils. I don't know why I was making this. And then I I painted the background this saffron color, and then importantly, I cut out the head from the foam core, and I took a few pieces of little wood pegs, and I glued them. I was going to glue them to the back of the foam core. Now, listen. At the time, I had seen a couple of Hockney paintings where he paints on the canvas and then he paints the scene onto the frame. So I tried to do the same. I wanted to Hockney a Hockney, and and so I do this. I try to do
Oh my
that.
God.
I don't remember if I actually completed that. But while I'm trying to glue the thing down, I get a phone call, and it's Hockney's, I think, assistant, and the guy says, "Listen, David was wondering, can you come in 2 hours instead of 2 days? Because David's decided he's going to go to London to work on an upcoming show." And and I'm looking down at half a painting, and I'm thinking, this is definitely going to be a problem. And I said, and I completely lie, and I say, "Oh, it's no problem at all." And he said, "Oh, wonderful." And I said, "Yeah, no problem at all." I lie again, and and I hang up the phone. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, I've got to get this
Oh
painting
my
done for Hockney.
God.
So I slap on the glue, I slap down the painting. It's like, it's totally wet. And thankfully, the paint is acrylic. The glue is a whole other question. It's the middle of summer, and I go jetting down Sunset Boulevard down to the beach. I have Hockney's. Hockney had two houses. One, he had a cottage at the beach, and he had his famous house high up in the Hollywood Hills, overlooking near the Hollywood Bowl. It's the house that has his famous pool with all the stripes that he's painted at the bottom. Anyway, so we're going to meet at his cottage at the beach. It's summer. I have the windows of my car all the way up because I have the heat turned all the way up so the glue can continue to dry. And I arrive at Hockney's cute little cottage. I think it literally, if my memory serves me right, it had a white picket fence. And I am just sweating because, of course, I've had my heat turned all the way up. Nick, he greets me at the gate. He gives me a big hug. I hand him the painting. He takes a look at the painting, which I somehow got done. He doesn't say a word. He flips the painting over. It says
Oh
something
my
like, "To
God.
David Hockney, you are God!" Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Exclamation. I, I put enough exclamation point, so many exclamation points. In that sentence. It's usually reserved for sentences like, "We found a match for your kidney." I mean, it was like that many exclamation points. That was like, "You are God." And anyway, so he invites me into his beautiful little cottage.
But he
Nothing,
takes the pain. He
nothing.
doesn't
I'm
say
not taking, and I
anything. Does he
wasn't
say
taking it
thank
personally.
you or?
Nothing. And he has a smile on his face. I mean, it seemed like he was good with it. Anyway, so we go into his cottage, which looks like
Amused, yeah.
so storybook, and it's just beautiful color everywhere. It's tiny, but it's like you want to live there in a second. And there's a little piano, and it's right on the sand, and
Wow.
the ocean is right there. And um, and then Hockney sits at this table that has this gigantic window that overlooks the Pacific, and nothing fancy, just very homey. And then he takes my painting, and now he's sitting at his table, and he's like just really studying the painting. Still doesn't say a word. Then he flips my painting over, reads it again, "To David Hockney, you are God," or whatever I wrote. Still nothing. And he gets up from the table, and he takes my painting,
Ah,
and he puts it up, standing up on his upright piano, and where the music sheets go. And then he invites me to sit down at his kitchen table. And in walks I think it was his master printer, who I think I want to say was also English. I might have that wrong, but I believe the person was also English. And he brings out lunch, and the three of us
oh
sit.
God.
And I've got David Hockney sitting to my right. His master printer is sitting across from me. My back is to the Pacific Ocean, and I am pinching myself. I'm like, I cannot believe I am having lunch at the home of my art god, and I want to express this to everyone without sounding like a stalker. I was actually invited in, and I and so in the master printer brings in a caprese salad, and we're drinking wine. And again, Hockney is telling the most he is such a magnificent storyteller, and he is so funny and again charming, and he's literally rolling cigarettes while we are enjoying this caprese salad, and drinking wine, and Nick, I think I literally pinched myself, and I'm like, I can't believe it. And I'm thinking, I think I am having the best day of my entire life. And I also at the same time was thinking, and perhaps that's what the captain of the Titanic was thinking as he said, "All aboard." Because as we were talking, and Hockney is telling some hysterically funny stories so naturally, and I'm looking at Hockney, and then I look to the side where the upright piano is, and then I look back at Hockney, and I look back at the piano where my painting has been standing up the whole time. And again, I'm doing this dance back and forth. Hockney, my painting on Hockney's piano. And I literally, my heart drops to my feet. And I notice that the gift that I have given my art god, David Hockney, that painting was clearly not dry, because even though it was a small painting, it still felt like it was 20 feet tall. That head had not fully dried. And there were now, as I'm looking at the painting on his piano, that head is now sliding slowly down the back of the piece onto that saffron color. And there are two snail marks of yellow going down, down,
Oh,
down. So I did what any rational person would do. I jumped up from the table and I grabbed the painting so I could perform some kind of arts and crafts CPR. And Hockney is looking at me like, what is happening? And so I grabbed the painting and he said, "What are you doing?" I'm sorry about my accent. I'm trying to do a decent English accent. And I said, "Well, you moved up the lunch to today instead of 2 days from now, and this didn't have a time to dry, and it's fallen all the way." I'm literally sweating in places I didn't even know I had sweat glands, and to this day, I'm sure I don't. And my voice was sounding like Truman Capote at happy hour, or really Truman Capote at any hour. And it's all happening in slow motion. I mean, and and so I
oh
start taking
God.
the painting apart, literally in front of David Hockney, and 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 he says to me, "What are you doing?" He
Oh my
says again.
God.
So I said, "I've got to fix it." And so Hockney asked to have the painting, and so I handed the painting to him, and he did this thing which I will never forget. It was like he was a masterful wizard of some kind, and he just put his hands over the painting, and he just started rotating his hand around it. I'll never forget. And he said, "Don't you see? It's all part of the painting." And then his master printer said, "Let me also have a
Wow.
look at it." And so Hockney passes my injured painting over to the master printer, and he had that same rotation thing in his elbow, and he was like, "Oh yes, David's right." And it was like he was doing like a wizardly blessing over it. "David's right. Don't you see? It is indeed all part of the painting."
Wow. The imperfection, it had improved behind David's back.
Exactly
And
that. So
oh my goodness.
I drove home in a fetal position, which is very hard to do when you're trying to get away quickly. And I curled up in that fetal position, I think, for about 5 days,
Hmm.
on a couch, trying to comprehend that my painting had fallen apart in front of my art god, David Hockney. And when I finally uncurled myself from that fetal position, since I do think I'm innately an optimist, I I began to think about those six things that had happened in just a very short time. I thought about all the art directors who had called and asked, "What program am I working in?" And I was like, "No, it's not on the computer. It's That was all done by hand." And then I thought about my time with the monks, talking about flow versus stagnation, authenticity versus inauthenticity. I thought about our favorite teacher from art school, Dwight Harmon, who just kept reminding me to make a mess. I also was thinking about T.S. Eliot, and who I believe famously said, "Only those who go too far can possibly find out how far to go." which I love because it's kind of encouraging to make a
Mm,
mess. Um, and then, of course, I thought about those 4 books that fell into my lap at that very time, and I thought about Kurt Schwitter's and his beautiful collages, and and how and all the wabi sabi in those collages, and then of course Hockney, and that it was all part of the painting. So I did the only thing I could, and that was to start experimenting and to somehow be some kind of a phoenix and rise again. Not to be overly dramatic, but I was in the stupor, and I mean I was in the dumpster emotionally after this enormous embarrassment in front of Hockney. And by the way, if you I don't have a relationship of a friendship with Hockney. Um, so if you asked him about this, I don't know if he would even. This is going back a long time ago, so I don't know if he'd remember this. But it had a life changing impact on me, of course, and that's what matters. But I began experimenting, and I thought about Schwitter's and his collages. So I began going to swap meets, and I went and I would find pieces of paper, some of it over 100 years old. I found 4 high school annuals, I think, from 1910, and I began tearing out pieces of paper, and I was just, is how sacrilegious was this? I don't know. But I found old music sheets from the 20s and 30s, and I just began cutting them into little squares and rectangles, and I began gluing them down, and then I started painting on top of them. And I did 5 or 6 of these kind of paintings where took the collage and then just painted a scene on top of it. And and then I had the opportunity to do a book jacket, and I was asked to do it in this. It was going to be in the style that I was playing with, and I I did that, and it came out okay. And this book jacket went out to art directors. It was a paper sample book that goes out to graphic designers and art directors and creative directors. Yes, you have the original.
which
That's
you
right.
gave me the
Yeah.
original.
Full circle right there. And
Right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
and so I think it went
Yes.
out. I
Yes.
want to say it went out to about 75,000 art directors around the world. And it was for me it was a totally big release of thankfulness, because it was allowing this new way of working with the collage was allowing me, as a kid whose bedroom was way too clean, I can't stress that enough, had this, everything had to be in its place. That there was, this was just a release of being able to mess up. That if I didn't like something, if I painted on something and I didn't like it, I could slap down another piece of collage paper and it would be fine. And I was also showing the imperfections when I put the paint going from one piece of paper to the other. I didn't want it to be opaque. I wanted it to be imperfect and not be fully opaque. And so um, uh, it went out to 75,000 art directors, and I started getting phone calls from old clients, which was crazy. And they were like, "Can you do it in this style?" And I'm like, "Yes." And it was amazing. And it was people who I had worked in my old style. Now they were calling me for the new style, and it
Mm.
worked. I had never been without clients under my old style, but I have to tell you, when I began working in the collage style, when you were a little kid and you were invited, and there was a kids' table during the holidays, and, and then there was the adult table. When I started doing the
Hmm.
collage, client wise, it was suddenly like I got invited away from the kids' table and got to sit with the adults. But although I was sure at any moment somebody was going to ask me to go get salt and pepper, I just, I was highly questioning, like, is this real? Because the clients I was getting, the jobs I was suddenly getting, they were so much more thrilling. They were jobs I had always dreamed about. And, Nick, one of my favorite quotes, if it's a quote, I guess, was by the legendary Betty Davis. And I think she said, creating is the meat and potatoes of life. So, but I've been vegan now for 30 years. So let's just say
Mm.
creating is the potatoes of life. And I, you know, I think that art, like potatoes, has given me and you as well sustenance. It has sustained us and kept our lives so so full. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't
Yes.
uncurled myself from that fetal position and simply allowed myself the space to create and experiment
Yeah.
and to mess up and to make a mess and just to see where it goes. And it worked.
I think it's so interesting as I reflect back this your story and all, because I was there. I remember those chapters, but it's almost like, do you ever feel like you're here to learn a thing? Like that's a big part of what you came here to learn, to go from the control to trust, to let go. And maybe the book that you read on Wabi Sabi was good, but it wasn't enough. And so then the universe sends you something else. And you had Dwight Harmon who, squirted acrylic paint, in his mouth to make you loosen up, and
All these things.
the
all,
playfulness of him, and then
yeah,
yeah, and then it just but it gets stronger each time, and then okay, and then the teacher arrives when the student's ready, and you needed to hear it from
I
your
never thought of it
god,
quite like
David
that, but you're right.
Hockney.
It
I
was a
mean,
crescendo
it's
upwards.
just
Uh, yes, it was. Um,
yeah,
yes, it really was. I do think about that, and I also think that knowing you, knowing me, I think that the lessons that we get, um, that we'll keep getting those lessons until we take our last breath. I think that's just the way we're built. That you and I,
mm,
we welcome those lessons. I don't. I think that if you are innately an artist, and this is to all your listeners, and I mentioned this before, but whether this is their first time with paint or drawing, or whether you are 30 years into it and you're trying to elevate it to another place, that you are all you're all artists making something and trying to make this world a little more beautiful. And and I think the world is starving for that. But also, if you are indeed innately an artist, that you are constantly wondering what else is possible, how can I make, what else can I do here? You're just asking questions. You're just asking questions, and to be a part of
yeah,
that community, to be that alive in the world of asking questions is just how we're built. uh, um, the conversation will be had for our entire life.
yeah, absolutely. And it is one of the challenges I work with a lot of people on is that is the uncertainty in that what you're describing is emergent, that we don't get to know ahead of time what it's going to be. We get we intuit it, we feel it a little,
Yeah.
um, but that's what just keeps it so interesting. And I think we know. I mean, I think you woke up. It's an unfolding for sure, but I think we know intuitively when we stop and listen. And usually, it's some kind of a. It took David Hockney in embarrassment. I mean, I learned so much from losing my train of thought in front of a room of 400 or 500 paying, you know, uh, listeners that came to hear me speak when I flubbed the whole presentation. I learned so much about, I overcame the fear of public speaking that I had already done the worst thing possible, which was to like humiliate myself. But I learned about getting out of my own way. I learned that people don't really care about, they don't really care so much as you do about yourself. They just want to know some things. They want to just shut up and give me some information. And, like those hard patches. I mean, you went to school and it was a powerful semester, but you did
Oh
it
yeah,
in
God,
one
Nick, I love that.
lunch with David Hockney, right? Like it's just sometimes like you can learn something, but it's painful when you have to learn quickly. You don't get it. You can learn slowly, but it takes a long time. Or you can learn quickly, and then there's a lot of effort and there's some challenges. And I always try to remember that when I'm struggling, it's like, I'm
Right,
just
right, right.
I'm just learning
Nick,
quickly. Yeah.
yes,
Which is
I'm
which is
thankful for
what we
that.
get to do the next
Very,
thing,
very, very thankful for that. Listen, I remember what
Yeah.
happened in Dallas. I remember now that you're mentioning it. I remember your how upset you were. But I hope this makes you feel better. I have
Oh,
spoken. I've gotten the chance to speak in front of like 500 people a couple of times, and it went okay. But I just want you to know I have bombed royally at least twice in a massive way that I understand what you're saying though about like I wish I could take it out of my body so I didn't have to think about those times that because I really did bomb in the
oh,
worst possible way. But you learn from like what I just said. Only those who go too far can possibly find out how far to go, and I think I went too far
yeah,
2 times. So, but as a speaker, but keep
yeah.
learning, and you're such an extraordinary guide and teacher, Nick.
Well, I think these pitfalls
Hmm.
are actually what qualifies you to teach. I felt like my ability to coach people is directly related to the struggles and the total train wreck that I've been through. That, because I can relate to people that are stuck, or and I know that it's just, oh my God, you can reframe this, you can see this in a different way. Like the next thing is coming, we just have to just hang on. Oh my God, you're just learning quickly. That's all that's happening now. And thank goodness you're going to move through this, and it's kind of painful or it's embarrassing or whatever,
Right.
but it's just, you're passing through it,
Exactly.
which,
It is.
it's
It's
really
all of
true.
that. It's all of that. I watch that in my students. So in my own students, and it does get replayed. Uh, my own. Well, I think that's why we get to teach because we have and continue to go through bumps in the road, and we see the bumps of our students, but that we survived, and we moved on to the next thing and learned and keep learning from each of those things. Right now I'm in the middle of throwing myself into a big mess right now. I had one of those weekends where I'm trying to create something visually that is not something I used to do. But I did have one of those 3 o'clock in the morning nights on Saturday night and on Sunday night where I couldn't stop and I forgot what time it was. And it might be total mud
Wow.
when I really
Ah,
put a little space of time between myself and that. But I don't know where that stuff comes from. But it's this hunger to find out where can this go, because you and I have seen that we have gotten to take our work certain places, and it got to a place where, in that moment in time, we were probably okay with it. Listen, you and I used to talk about percentages. Do you remember this? We had this conversation of like how often it was a piece of success, and I think we were almost doing it like baseball players, which was so corny.
Yes.
Like trying to come up like I think the bottom line was is that we got to hit like one out of every four times or one every three times or something like that. And not just I don't mean like this piece is amazing. I mean, all right, I it wasn't horrible, right? And I
Right. But
can
not
sleep at night that
horrible.
I
Yeah.
sent this to a client. But also we have worked under deadlines, and so there's that. And then there's also self-imposed deadlines, and just trying to make a piece under the time that you've been given to arrive at a place that hopefully brings joy, not just to yourself, but hopefully to a viewer, and or any emotion, whatever it might be, not just joy. You know, it. We thankfully we've had enough one out of four or one out of three to know like, okay, I think I can keep going here. I want to see where else this goes. Um,
Yeah, yeah, right. You just need a couple good ones to kind of keep you going. And then you look back in a year, 6 months, and that good one was the only purpose of it was to make you do the next one. You know, my dad used to always say that it's not so important what are the things behind you. It's more important
I
like
love
what's in
that.
front of
You
you that you're
know,
working on right
both. So
now, you know.
your dad and my dad were both they were both painters. I mean, that wasn't their job. That wasn't their job. But it's just one more
Hmm.
similarity between you and I. Uh, it's really crazy though, because you and I
Hmm.
have had so many things that have happened at the same time. We've had successes and we've had some not so successes right at the same time. It's been such a blessing in so many ways, and so many similarities. You know that you became this brother from another mother.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, absolutely. Last week, I mentioned at the end of the podcast, and we have this as a feature of the podcast. If you go to art2life.com and click on podcasts, there's a little yellow tab to the right, and you can record a question. And we can't answer all the questions, but some of the good ones, I read them all. And there were some great questions asked last week, and I would love to have you answer a couple of them now. So, as a way to kind of wrap this up. So let me just play a couple of
sounds
these,
good.
and then we can call it a day.
Hi, Nick. This is Kathleen. Thanks for taking my question. I'd like to ask Noah which artists inspire him uh, in painting, and if he is inspired by abstract or some other medium. Um, yeah, that's what I'd like to know. And I'd also like him to connect the question with his writing and or poetry, because I know the crossover is there.
So it's kind of great. Great question.
The one artist who has particularly stood out for me since I'm probably a teenager, and that would be David Hockney for sure. But there's like there are so many. I mean, I have so many books that, like you, Nick, I've run out of room. And I have so many art books of just a lot of people that I love. I mean, I could literally just go through so many. But I know that you and I share a great love for Bryce Martin. I That's somebody who I just get completely lost in. In fact, I once flew back east just to see a show of his in Washington, D.C., a retrospective. And to answer the part about abstraction, this is what I have discovered. I have found with myself and then seeing it in my students that I feel like the majority of artists start more in the narrative and more narrative illustration or more narrative paintings, it's rare for me to find a student who immediately begins in the with a love for abstraction. What I've noticed with our peers is that we have moved from a love of narrative to a great love of abstraction. And you and I, it happened around the same time that we were like completely starting to move towards this great love of abstraction. I still love a lot of narrative art, but there's something about abstraction. It just brings me this other kind of joy, and so I'm pretty crazy about abstraction. I mean, I could name so many different people, but at the head of the list is probably Bryce Marden as far as abstraction, but also
What about his work?
it's a couple of things. You know what? I just actually a few days ago, a friend, one of my dear friends, invited me to go see a show on Anselm Kiefer, and it was extraordinary. And it was also overwhelming. And I Anselm Kiefer, I would not describe as abstract, but these were monumental pieces. I think it was like 9 monumental pieces that would be almost could take over. Each piece could be on an entire stage, and they were at least a couple of stories high. And not only were they absolutely just overwhelming to look at, they were overwhelmingly beautiful and powerful and poignant. And this happened to me a couple of times where I was not only taken by the beauty of the work, but I was overwhelmed physically by the work. I mean, you could make a very large painting and it could not be something that you're attracted to at all. And so that's not going to matter. But when you are not only completely overwhelmed by the painting itself, but also that the size overwhelms your body. It happened to me the very first time when I was 21 and I was a student in Paris, and I was at the Louvre, and I think I was standing in front of a Delacroix, and I just remember the feeling of here's this extraordinary painting. It is so not, I wasn't caught up in the history of it. I was caught up in just the beauty of it. But then I was caught up in the immensity of it, and it overwhelmed my body physically. And this happened again with Bryce Marden when I stood in front of a painting that went on for days, as a lot of his paintings that are very horizontal. I don't know if it was this very long painting, and his work is so dreamlike. And when you step in front of it, you get lost in this world that it seems like a very beautiful world.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
A lot of that happens with a lot of large paintings that you might see from the from abstract expressionism that of the 40s, of the 50s. Does that happen for you with any artist in particular, Nick?
Well, I relate to Bryce Marden, what you're saying, and the scale of it. It is like you enter a world. And I've experienced this. I mean, I experienced it looking at the Monet water lily paintings in Europe, like they're just the scale of it, but it is just such a particular it's not narrowed down. It's just such a deep study by the artist that you can get to experience their depth of the inquiry in 1 second. And that's the overwhelm, or not the overwhelm, just the immensity feeling that you get. Bryce Martin's work with this, it's enormous, but there's such subtlety in it, and there's so much depth, and there's so much movement, and it's just this line work, and so
There's literally so much depth to those.
I know, and it's so simple. It feels simple, but it's so complicated. And I think that's something that I really admire in work, and I struggle to do that. I don't know. It's just sort of like an amazing someone who's incredible at at a some kind of craft where they solve the problem so simply, so elegantly, so beautifully, that and I see that in all kinds of amazing artists' work. That's what I tend to notice.
When I stand in front of your paintings, I also get lost in your work as well, not just for the immensity of some of your paintings, but also because they're so insanely beautiful. So when you have both, when both those things come together, I mean, it seems like a fairly win-win situation.
Yeah, yeah.
So
You
there's that.
know, that we had a couple questions about, we only have a few minutes here, and I wanted to just hit it because there were a couple questions around um kind of how do we have different listeners doing different kinds of artwork, from more commercial kind of artwork, obviously illustration, which we've both done and you were involved in, and then more fine art and everything in between, and design. And how do you, and we can get stuck in the categories, and you have been a person who's been inspiring to me because you cross over from your teaching to poetry to writing, and it relates to the question that the previous caller had. But how you easily move from different thing to different thing. Does that make sense? I think we struggle with that we think we have to stay in a category, or that category makes me this kind of artist, and we can feel hemmed in. But you've never, it has felt to me like you don't just have challenges with that. And I was curious, how come?
Oh, um, well, you know what? Ever since I was a kid, I knew that I loved writing and I knew that I loved art. And I knew that from about 7 or 8 years old. And nobody said that I had to get rid of one of them. One of my, I had 3 or 4 mentors, and one of my mentors, who is this incredibly um, wonderful human being and successful in their own right, told me once when I was probably in my early 20s, he said I could only be good at one thing at, at a time. And
At a
that,
time. Yeah.
yeah, at a time, it sort of haunted me and still does a little bit. But I just need to take care of those creative needs, and so they've been there since I was a little kid. They clearly have been there, and it's just a matter of making time for them. I'm surrounded by artists. Very few of them also have a love. I don't find so many painters and illustrators who are also um, hyper in need of writing as well. Um, but that's all good, all fine. I just need to take care of that. And I have always loved writing, but I've also always loved painting. Um, and also they tap into different parts of me. For instance, when I'm painting or when I'm illustrating, I could have 50 people in my studio and we could be having a big party and I'd be like talking to them and everything. And I'd be painting in and, I'd be, oh yeah, yeah, get me some pretzels. And But when I'm writing, that is a completely different world, as you know. And I need to be so in my own space, in my own world. And I get lost in writing in a way that it is very different than the way that I get lost in creating artwork. And both of them, it's just in my DNA that I really need to talk with both of those things in my life and address them, and um, always have. I haven't questioned it. I just always know. I've always known that it was there. And
That's great. Beautiful.
how do you take care of that? Because I know you're an amazing writer.
It's a good thing, bad thing. I tend to, uh, I'm really, I chase shiny things a little too much, but it's a good, I think the benefit outweighs the difficulties of it. I think there's a lot of sense to doing one thing at a time, but it doesn't mean you have to do one thing all the time. And
Right.
so what I've been trying to learn how to do is to really drop in to what I'm doing. And that really is something I've learned from art making, that flow state, whether I'm talking to you right now or whether I'm working on a tiny house like I'm doing right now with my daughter and figuring out the colors for the siding, or whether I'm making a painting or I'm trying to come up with the right phrasing in my writing. I think the presence is what matters, but I am definitely not someone to look at to role model doing one thing and
No,
just for a long time.
you are not. By the way, there is nothing wrong with chasing shiny things.
I
Uh,
love it.
I mean, I think we've both made a life out of it.
Yes, yes. Well, listen, Noah, I so appreciate. I'm glad we had a couple minutes there to hit some of those questions. We can't do them all, unfortunately. We're running out of time here. But listen, thanks so much for being here twice. It's just it's been really a privilege and so fun always to
Always.
connect with you.
Always. Thanks so much, Nick. What a treat. And so good to spend time with you. I so appreciate it.
So everyone, again, if you hit the show notes, you can see there's links to Noah's Instagram, website. Um, go check that out, and we will see you next week. If you can, if this was a great episode, please leave a review. That's sort of how podcasts get out there in the world, and we're doing that now. And it has a lot to do with the fact that you're leaving reviews and participating here. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week. Okay, bye everyone.